The fastest way to discover who someone really is to give them power over a person they believe does not matter. The plastic bucket rolled across the polished floor with a hollow sound that instantly drew every eye in the lobby. A few drops of water splashed across the white marble tiles. Conversation stopped. The morning rush inside Brooks' regional headquarters slowed just enough for people to notice what had happened. Vanessa Carter bent down calmly and reached for the bucket handle. She wore a gray janitor uniform, comfortable work shoes, and a company badge that identified her as part of the cleaning staff. To everyone around her, she looked like another maintenance worker beginning an ordinary day. Then a sharp voice cut through the silence. Seriously? Daniel Brooks stepped forward from the elevator area, holding an expensive coffee cup in one hand and a tablet in the other. The white operations manager glanced at the small puddle on the floor as if it were a personal insult. Several employees immediately lowered their eyes. Nobody seemed eager to become part of the situation. Vanessa looked up. "I apologize. I have it under control." Daniel laughed. Not loudly, just enough for nearby employees to hear. "That is what you people always say." A few uncomfortable glances moved through the lobby. Vanessa remained quiet. Daniel shook his head and took a sip from his water bottle. "Do you know how much money this company loses when people cannot do simple jobs correctly?" Vanessa slowly stood with the bucket in her hand. "The floor will be dry in less than a minute." Daniel smirked. "That is not the point." Then, in a moment so casual it almost felt unreal, he tilted the bottle and let a stream of water spill directly onto the freshly cleaned section of floor beside her. Several employees froze. The water spread across the marble surface. "There," Daniel said. "Now you have something to do." Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. A receptionist behind the front desk looked away. A young intern standing near the entrance stared at the floor. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa looked at the water, then at Daniel. Her expression never changed. No anger, no embarrassment, no argument, only calm observation. That seemed to irritate him even more. "What?" Daniel asked. "Nothing to say?" Vanessa offered a small nod. "Thank you." The answer caught him off guard. Several people blinked. Daniel frowned. "Thank you." Vanessa reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small black notebook. It looked old and well-used. She opened it carefully and wrote a single line. Daniel watched with visible confusion. "What are you writing?" Vanessa closed the notebook. "Just a reminder." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Whatever helps you get through the day." He turned and walked toward the executive elevators. The crowd slowly began moving again. Conversations restarted. Shoes clicked across marble floors. Yet more than one employee glanced back at the woman in the janitor uniform. Vanessa waited until Daniel disappeared from view. Then she looked toward the company mission statement engraved on the far lobby wall. Respect, integrity, leadership. Her eyes lingered on those words for several seconds. Finally, she slipped the notebook back into her pocket and picked up the bucket. The first entry of the day had been made, and Daniel Brooks had absolutely no idea who was holding the notebook. Vanessa spent the next several hours moving quietly through the building as if nothing unusual had happened. The bucket rolled beside her. The scent of fresh floor cleaner drifted through hallways lined with framed awards and motivational slogans. Employees hurried from meeting to meeting carrying laptops, coffee cups, and stacks of reports. Most barely noticed the woman in the janitor uniform. A few offered polite smiles. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Vanessa noticed all of it. She noticed who held doors open. She noticed who thanked support staff. She noticed who spoke respectfully when nobody important appeared to be watching. Shortly after noon, she entered the fourth-floor administrative wing. The area looked different from the lobby. Less polished, less impressive. The carpet showed signs of wear. Several cubicles sat half empty. A young woman stared at a computer screen with red eyes and slumped shoulders. Vanessa slowed her cart. The employee looked exhausted. "Long day?" Vanessa asked gently. The young woman forced a smile. "Long year." Vanessa paused. "That bad?" The employee glanced around before lowering her voice. "I should not complain." Vanessa waited. Silence often encouraged honesty better than questions. After a moment, the young woman sighed. "I used to love working here." Her eyes drifted toward a closed office at the end of the hallway. Daniel's office. "Now?" Vanessa asked. The employee looked away. "Now most people spend their day trying not to get noticed." Before Vanessa could respond, The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Several workers immediately straightened in their chairs. Screens changed. Conversations ended. Daniel Brooks appeared from around the corner, carrying a tablet beneath one arm. The shift in atmosphere happened so quickly, it almost felt rehearsed. Vanessa watched carefully. Daniel stopped beside a cubicle and frowned. "Why is this report not finished?" The employee sitting there swallowed hard. "I am waiting for data from accounting." Daniel did not lower his voice. "Then go get it. I am tired of excuses." The worker nodded quickly. Daniel moved on. Nobody spoke until he disappeared into his office. The hallway seemed to exhale all at once. Vanessa pulled the small black notebook from her pocket. Another note. Another observation. Another pattern. As she closed the notebook, her eyes landed on a wall displaying employee recognition awards from previous years. Dozens of names covered the board. Some had stars beside them. Some had photographs. One section caught her attention immediately. Employee Retention Excellence. The most recent winner was 5 years old. Nothing newer. Vanessa studied the empty space beneath it. A company growing this quickly should have celebrated people constantly. Yet the board looked abandoned. Forgotten. She stood there for several seconds. Then she heard laughter coming from a nearby conference room. Through the glass wall, Daniel stood speaking to a group of managers. His smile was wide. His confidence effortless. The same man who intimidated employees in private seemed completely different in front of leadership. Vanessa watched quietly. Then she opened the notebook one more time and wrote a second line beneath the first. This time her expression did not change. But something in her eyes did. Because she was beginning to realize the problem inside Brooks' regional headquarters was much larger than one unpleasant conversation in the lobby. By late afternoon, the building had settled into the familiar rhythm of keyboards, ringing phones, and hurried footsteps. Vanessa pushed her cleaning cart through the executive floor, moving slowly enough to observe, but never slowly enough to attract attention. The scent of lemon cleaner lingered in the air. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking downtown Chicago, painting long shadows across the carpet. Most employees were focused on deadlines. A few looked exhausted. Vanessa noticed that too. Near the break room, she found a young employee standing alone beside a vending machine. The woman stared at a resignation letter displayed on her laptop screen. Her eyes looked tired, defeated. Vanessa stopped beside a nearby trash bin and quietly replaced the liner. "Rough day?" she asked. The woman laughed softly. "Rough 6 months." Vanessa glanced toward the laptop. The employee quickly lowered the screen. "Sorry," she said. "You probably do not want to hear about it." Vanessa smiled. "Sometimes talking helps." The woman hesitated. Then words began spilling out faster than she probably intended. "I came here because everyone said this company cared about people. They talked about mentorship and growth and leadership." Her eyes drifted toward the hallway. "Now half my team is looking for jobs." Vanessa listened carefully. "Why?" The employee lowered her voice. "Because nobody wants to work under Daniel." The answer arrived immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Vanessa felt a familiar sensation settle in her chest. Another data point. Another pattern. "Has anyone reported it?" Vanessa asked. The employee laughed again, though there was no humor in it. "To who?" Before Vanessa could answer, the break room door opened. 2 co-workers entered carrying coffee cups. The conversation ended instantly. The young employee forced a smile and returned to her laptop. Vanessa continued down the hallway. 30 minutes later, she passed a row of offices where framed photographs lined the walls. Company celebrations, charity events, award ceremonies, smiling faces, successful years. Vanessa paused at one photograph showing the building's grand opening nearly 15 years earlier. She studied the image for several seconds. Nobody would have recognized her younger self in the picture even if they looked closely. The woman in the photograph wore a navy business suit instead of a janitor uniform. Her hair was different. Her life was different. Most importantly, almost nobody currently employed here had ever met her in person. That had been intentional. The company had grown so quickly that her public appearances became rare. She preferred listening to presentations rather than standing in front of cameras. She preferred watching people work rather than hearing people describe their work, which was exactly why she was here now. A voice suddenly echoed from the conference room nearby. "Daniel." Vanessa stopped walking. Through the partially open door, she could see him addressing several managers. His confidence filled the room. "Corporate leadership wants results," he said. Results come from accountability. Heads nodded around the table. Then Daniel smiled. The good news is that I have been informed our division is being reviewed for executive advancement opportunities. Excited whispers followed. Vanessa watched silently from the hallway. Daniel looked proud, certain, almost triumphant. Then he added something that made several people laugh. When the new leadership team is announced, some people are going to be very surprised. Vanessa reached into her pocket and touched the small black notebook. Her expression remained calm. But behind that calm, another realization was beginning to form. Daniel was not merely comfortable with his behavior. He believed it was being rewarded. The next morning arrived with cold gray clouds hanging over the Chicago skyline. Employees poured into the building carrying coffee cups and laptops, moving through the lobby with the same hurried energy Vanessa had watched for days. She pushed her cleaning cart past the reception desk shortly after 8 o'clock. The polished marble floor reflected the overhead lights like still water. Everything looked professional. Everything looked successful. Yet the closer she looked, the more cracks she found beneath the surface. Near the customer service department, she noticed something unusual. Several employees had gathered around a desk in complete silence. No one was speaking. No one was smiling. A young man sat staring at a computer screen while an email remained open in front of him. Vanessa slowed her cart. The employee rubbed his forehead and sighed. One coworker placed a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" The young man forced a laugh. "I will survive." The answer sounded automatic. Practiced. Vanessa continued cleaning nearby while quietly listening. "What happened?" another employee asked. The young man glanced toward Daniel's office before lowering his voice. He tore apart the entire presentation in front of everyone. Nobody seemed surprised. That detail caught Vanessa's attention immediately. One employee simply nodded. Another looked away. The reaction was not shock. It was familiarity. Vanessa opened her notebook and wrote another line. A pattern repeated often enough stopped being an incident. It became culture. 30 minutes later, she entered a supply room on the 3rd floor. The room smelled faintly of cardboard, printer toner, and industrial cleaner. While organizing shelves, she heard voices outside the partially open door. Daniel's voice carried easily through the hallway. "I do not care how long you worked on it." Silence followed. Then another voice. Nervous. Apologetic. "I thought the client requested." Daniel cut him off. "Stop thinking and start listening." Footsteps followed. The conversation ended. Vanessa remained still for several seconds. Not because the exchange surprised her. Because it sounded exactly like the others. Different employee. Same fear. Different situation. Same outcome. Later that afternoon, she stopped beside a framed display showing employee statistics from previous years. Turnover numbers. Performance awards. Retention records. Most visitors would have walked past without noticing. Vanessa did not. Her eyes moved slowly across the figures, then stopped. Employee retention had declined steadily over the last 4 years. Customer satisfaction remained strong. Revenue remained strong. But people were leaving. Quietly. Consistently. The realization settled heavily in her mind. Financial reports would never reveal this. Profit charts would never reveal this. Yet eventually, every company paid for the culture it created. As she stood there, Daniel emerged from a nearby conference room surrounded by managers. He looked confident, relaxed, successful. One manager congratulated him on another strong quarter. Daniel smiled. Results speak for themselves. The group laughed and continued walking. Vanessa watched them disappear down the hallway. Then she looked at the notebook in her hand. The small black cover had begun filling with observations. Dates, names, conversations, moments. None of them seemed dramatic by themselves. Together, they painted a very different picture. Vanessa closed the notebook and slipped it back into her pocket. Across the hallway, a large company banner displayed 3 words in bold silver letters. Respect, integrity, leadership. She stared at them for several seconds. Then she continued pushing her cart forward, already beginning to suspect that before this week ended, someone would have to explain why those words existed only on the wall. Thursday morning began with rain tapping softly against the tall glass windows of Brooks Regional Headquarters. The gray sky cast a muted light across the building, turning the polished hallways into long corridors of silver reflections. Vanessa pushed her cleaning cart through the 6th floor shortly after sunrise. Most employees had not arrived yet. The offices were quiet except for the distant hum of computers and ventilation systems. She preferred these hours. Buildings often revealed more truth before people filled them. As she passed a row of executive offices, something caught her attention. At the far end of the hallway stood a large display wall dedicated to company achievements. Awards, growth milestones, newspaper articles, photographs. Vanessa stopped in front of it. She had walked past the display before, but this morning one particular section stood out. A framed timeline traced the company's history from a small startup to a national organization employing thousands. Vanessa's eyes moved slowly across the dates. Some of the events brought back memories. Late nights, difficult decisions, sacrifices nobody ever saw. Then she noticed something strange. Several key names had disappeared from the company's story. Early leaders, department builders, employees who had helped create the culture years ago. Their contributions had been reduced to tiny footnotes or removed entirely. Vanessa stood silently for several moments. Behind every successful company were people. Yet somewhere along the way, the story had become focused only on numbers. Revenue, growth, expansion. The human side seemed to have faded. She opened her notebook and wrote another observation. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Employees began arriving. The atmosphere changed immediately. Energy filled the hallways. Conversation started. Coffee aromas drifted through the air. Vanessa continued working. Near the marketing department, she found two employees speaking quietly near a printer. They stopped when they noticed her. Then one of them sighed. Honestly, I am just waiting to see who gets promoted. The other laughed. Everybody already knows. Daniel. Who else? Vanessa kept her attention on the floor while listening. Maybe corporate sees something we do not. The second employee shook his head. Or maybe nobody is paying attention. Those words stayed with Vanessa long after the conversation ended. Later that afternoon, she entered a conference room after a management meeting had finished. Empty coffee cups remained scattered across the table. Presentation slides still glowed on a large screen. Vanessa began cleaning when she noticed a printed agenda left behind. She glanced down. Near the bottom was a note regarding executive succession planning. Daniel's name appeared prominently among the candidates. Vanessa folded the paper back exactly where she found it. Her expression remained calm, but the realization settled deeper than before. Daniel was not simply expecting advancement. The organization itself appeared to be preparing for it. Outside the conference room, laughter echoed through the hallway. Daniel walked past surrounded by managers. He looked confident, comfortable, certain of his future. As he disappeared around the corner, Vanessa looked down at the notebook in her hand. The pages were filling quickly now. Patterns, decisions, conversations, culture. None of it existed in financial reports. None of it appeared on performance dashboards. Yet all of it determined the future of the company. Vanessa closed the notebook and slipped it back into her pocket. Somewhere beyond the rain-streaked windows, the city continued moving through another ordinary day. Inside the building, however, a very different kind of storm was quietly gathering. Friday arrived with clear skies and bright sunlight pouring through the glass walls of Brooks Regional Headquarters. The storm outside had passed, but inside the building a different kind of pressure seemed to be building with every hour. Vanessa noticed it immediately. Employees were talking more quietly. Managers were checking emails more often. Rumors moved through departments faster than official announcements. Something was coming. Nobody seemed to know exactly what, but everyone felt it. Vanessa pushed her cleaning cart through the customer service floor shortly before lunch. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air. Phones rang continuously. Computer screens glowed beneath rows of fluorescent lights. Near the break room, she noticed a young employee sitting alone at a table. The woman looked no older than 24. A half-finished sandwich rested untouched beside her. Her eyes were fixed on a company benefits brochure. Vanessa paused nearby to empty a trash can. After several moments, the employee spoke without looking up. "Can I ask you something?" Vanessa turned. "Of course." The young woman hesitated. "Have you ever stayed somewhere because you believed it could become better?" Vanessa studied her carefully. "Yes." The employee finally looked up. "Even when everyone around you says it will not." Vanessa smiled gently. "Especially then." The answer seemed to surprise her. The young woman stared down at the brochure again. "I wanted to build a career here." Her voice softened. "Now I am not sure." Vanessa remained silent. The woman continued speaking. The company says people matter. The posters say people matter. The website says people matter. But every day feels different. Vanessa felt the weight behind those words. Not anger. Disappointment. Sometimes disappointment damaged organizations far more than frustration ever could. Before she could respond, another employee entered the break room carrying a tablet. "Did you hear?" he asked excitedly. "Corporate leadership is coming next week." The young woman looked up. "For what?" He lowered his voice. "Executive evaluations. Promotions. Leadership reviews." The room immediately grew quiet. Vanessa continued cleaning while listening. "I heard Daniel is practically guaranteed a promotion," he added. The young woman sighed. "Then nothing is going to change." Those words lingered long after the conversation ended. Later that afternoon, Vanessa found herself near the executive wing again. Through a conference room window, she saw Daniel addressing several department managers. Charts filled the screen behind him. Revenue numbers, growth projections, performance rankings. Everything looked impressive. The managers nodded along as he spoke. Confident, certain, successful. Vanessa watched from the hallway. Then something unexpected happened. One manager raised a question about employee turnover. Daniel's smile faded slightly. "Turnover is the cost of maintaining high standards," he replied. Several people nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Vanessa noticed which was which. She opened the small black notebook and wrote another line. Then another. When she finished, she closed the cover and looked through the glass once more. Daniel appeared completely convinced he was leading effectively. That realization concerned her more than any rude comment or public humiliation ever could. Because arrogance could be corrected. Ignorance could be corrected. But a leader who mistook fear for respect often damaged far more than he realized. As evening settled over the city and golden light stretched across the office windows, Vanessa stood alone near the executive floor. Her notebook felt heavier than before. Not because of its weight, because of what it contained. And for the first time since arriving at the building, she began wondering whether the upcoming review would reveal more than anyone expected. Monday morning arrived with an unusual energy flowing through Brooks Regional Headquarters. The moment Vanessa stepped into the lobby, she could feel it. Employees gathered in small groups near elevators. Conversations stopped when managers walked past. Phones buzzed with new messages. Somewhere during the weekend, the rumors had become reality. Corporate leadership was coming. Vanessa pushed her cleaning cart across the marble floor while listening carefully. The atmosphere reminded her of the hours before a major storm. Everything looked normal. Nothing felt normal. Near the reception desk, two employees stood whispering beside a coffee station. "The review team arrives Wednesday," one of them said. "I heard they are interviewing people directly." The second employee laughed nervously. "Then half the building is terrified." Vanessa continued moving without looking toward them. A few minutes later, she entered the operations department. The difference was immediate. Desks looked cleaner. Managers smiled more often. Doors that normally remained closed were suddenly open. Even Daniel appeared different. Vanessa noticed him speaking politely to employees she had previously watched him dismiss without a second glance. The change was subtle but unmistakable. That alone told her more than any report ever could. Shortly before noon, Vanessa found herself organizing supplies in a storage room when someone entered quietly behind her. It was the young employee from the break room. The woman looked less exhausted than before, though uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Vanessa smiled. "You already did once." The employee laughed softly. "Fair enough." She hesitated. "Do you ever wonder if one person can actually change a company?" Vanessa paused before answering. Companies change when enough people stop pretending everything is fine. The young woman stared at her for several seconds. "You do not sound like a janitor." Vanessa smiled but said nothing. The employee eventually returned the smile and walked away. After she left, Vanessa stood quietly for a moment. Then she opened the small black notebook again. Another observation. Another conversation. Another piece of a much larger picture. Later that afternoon, a company-wide email appeared on screens throughout the building. Vanessa noticed the reaction immediately. Employees opened the message. Read it. Then read it again. Some looked hopeful. Others looked worried. The subject line was simple. Executive Leadership Evaluation Week. Daniel emerged from his office less than 10 minutes later wearing the confident expression Vanessa had come to recognize. He moved through the department shaking hands and speaking with managers. Big opportunity for all of us, he announced. Corporate wants to see excellence. Several employees nodded. A few forced smiles. Vanessa watched from the hallway. Daniel genuinely believed he was about to be rewarded. That certainty showed in every step he took. Yet as she looked around the department, she noticed something else. Employees were watching him differently now. Not with admiration, not even with fear, with curiosity, as though they were waiting to see what would happen next. Vanessa slipped the notebook into her pocket and glanced toward the large company banner hanging above the main corridor. Respect, integrity, leadership. For days those words had felt disconnected from reality. Today, for the first time, she sensed they were moving closer together. Because the review everyone expected was finally approaching. And when it arrived, far more than promotions would be evaluated. Wednesday morning arrived with bright sunlight flooding the glass exterior of Brooks Regional Headquarters. From the outside, the building looked exactly as it always had. Professional, successful, impressive. Inside, however, tension moved through every department like an invisible current. Corporate leadership had officially arrived. Employees checked their appearance before meetings. Managers reviewed presentations for the third and fourth time. Even conversations in the break rooms seemed quieter. Vanessa pushed her cleaning cart through the executive floor shortly after 9 o'clock. The wheels rolled softly across the carpet while she observed everything around her. For the first time all week, she noticed something unexpected. People were beginning to talk openly. Not loudly, not publicly, but enough. Near a conference room, 2 senior employees stood speaking in low voices. Maybe this is finally the chance for things to change, one said. The other nodded. If they asked the right questions. Vanessa continued walking. A few minutes later, she passed a group of employees waiting outside an interview room. Some looked nervous. Others looked hopeful. One young analyst quietly told another employee, "I already decided I am going to be honest." Vanessa heard the response immediately. "Me too." That answer stayed with her. Honesty was contagious once people believed it was safe. Around noon, she entered an empty conference room to replace supplies. Sunlight stretched across the long, polished table. Several folders remained stacked neatly near one end. Vanessa noticed one folder had been left slightly open. She did not touch it. She did not need to. The visible page already revealed enough. Employee engagement surveys, retention concerns, leadership assessments, topics she had been documenting all week. The official review was finally looking in the same direction she was. Later that afternoon, the building buzzed with a new rumor. Vanessa heard it first from a receptionist, then from a supervisor, then from 3 different employees in separate departments. Corporate leadership had narrowed executive promotion candidates. Daniel's name remained at the top of the list. The news spread quickly. So did the reactions. Some employees seemed resigned, others disappointed. Very few appeared excited. Vanessa found that detail especially revealing. Near 4 o'clock, she walked past Daniel's office. The door stood open. Inside, he spoke confidently with 2 visiting executives. Charts filled a large screen behind him. Revenue growth, cost reductions, operational performance. Numbers. Strong numbers. Impressive numbers. Daniel smiled as he explained his accomplishments. The executives listened carefully. Vanessa remained outside only long enough to observe. Then she continued down the hallway. As she turned a corner, she nearly collided with the young employee from the break room. The woman looked nervous. "I just finished my interview," she said quietly. Vanessa smiled. "How did it go?" The employee hesitated. Then something surprising happened. She smiled too. A real smile. For the first time in a long time, I think somebody actually listened. Vanessa watched her walk away. Then she slowly reached into her pocket and removed the small black notebook. She flipped through page after page of observations gathered throughout the week. Conversations, behaviors, patterns, moments. Finally, she stopped at the very first entry. The water, the lobby, Daniel. For several seconds, she stared at those words. Then she closed the notebook. Because the week was approaching its most important moment. And by the end of tomorrow, the company would learn a truth that had been standing in front of them the entire time. Thursday morning felt strangely calm. The nervous energy that had filled Brooks' regional headquarters all week seemed to have settled into anticipation. Employees still whispered in hallways. Managers still checked their email every few minutes. Yet beneath it all was a growing sense that the waiting was almost over. Vanessa arrived before sunrise and moved quietly through the building with her cleaning cart. The lobby lights reflected across polished marble floors. Outside, the city was just beginning to wake. Inside, the final day of executive evaluations had begun. As she passed the reception area, she noticed something unusual. Employees who had barely spoken earlier in the week were now sharing conversations openly. One receptionist smiled as she greeted a coworker. A customer service representative laughed while discussing plans for the weekend. The atmosphere was not carefree, but it was honest. Vanessa appreciated that. Fear had begun losing its grip. Shortly after 10 o'clock, she entered a hallway near the executive offices and found several employees gathered around a bulletin board. They were discussing promotion rumors. Daniel's name surfaced repeatedly. Most people nodded when they heard it. Not because they were excited, because they expected it. Vanessa listened quietly. Expectations often revealed more than opinions. A few hours later, she crossed paths with Daniel himself. He emerged from a conference room carrying a folder and speaking with two senior managers. Confidence radiated from him. His posture was relaxed, his smile effortless. He thanked people as he walked past. He complimented employees he had ignored only days earlier. The transformation would have seemed impressive if Vanessa had not spent an entire week observing the difference between performance and character. Daniel stopped near the elevator bank and glanced toward her. Recognition flashed across his face. "Still working hard?" he asked with a grin. Vanessa rested both hands on the handle of her cart. "There is always work to do." Daniel chuckled. "That is the right attitude." Then he lowered his voice slightly. "Big day today." Vanessa nodded. "It seems that way." Daniel smiled wider. "A lot of people are about to get good news." For a brief moment, Vanessa simply looked at him. Not with anger, not with judgment, only curiosity. Daniel mistook the silence for agreement and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. He disappeared. Vanessa remained standing there for several seconds. Then she reached into her pocket and removed the small black notebook. The pages were nearly full now. Every observation from the week sat inside. Every conversation, every moment, every choice. Slowly, she turned to the final blank page. Then she wrote a single sentence. The last entry. When she finished, she closed the notebook and held it in both hands. The weight felt familiar, not because of the paper, because of what the paper represented. Around her, employees continued moving through the building, unaware that one of the most important chapters in the company's history was only hours away. Vanessa looked toward the executive conference center at the far end of the floor. Tomorrow morning, leaders from across the organization would gather there. Presentations would be delivered. Decisions would be announced. Futures would change. And for the first time all week, Vanessa allowed herself a small smile. Because the truth no longer needed to be discovered. The truth had already been written down. Friday morning arrived wrapped in sunlight and expectation. Brooks' regional headquarters looked immaculate. Floors gleamed. Glass walls reflected the city skyline. Fresh coffee filled the air. Employees moved through the building dressed a little sharper than usual, speaking a little softer than usual. Everyone knew today mattered. The executive conference center on the top floor had been prepared before sunrise. Rows of chairs faced a large stage. Screens displayed the company logo beside three familiar words: respect, integrity, leadership. Vanessa stood alone in a service corridor a few minutes before the gathering began. Her gray janitor uniform was still neatly pressed. Her small black notebook rested in one hand. She slowly opened it and reviewed the final pages. Conversations, observations, names, patterns. A full week of truth written in simple ink. When she reached the last page, she paused. Then she closed the notebook and slipped it into her pocket. Down the hallway, employees began filing into the conference center. Managers greeted one another. Department heads exchanged nervous smiles. Daniel Brooks walked through the crowd with unmistakable confidence. Several people congratulated him before anything had even been announced. He accepted every compliment with practiced humility. "We will see what happens," he said repeatedly. Yet his expression suggested he believed he already knew. Inside the conference center, the seats quickly filled. The atmosphere felt electric. Anticipation hung in the room like static before a storm. Daniel took a seat near the front beside several senior leaders. He glanced around and smiled. Everything appeared to be unfolding exactly as he expected. A few minutes later, One of the corporate executives stepped onto the stage. The room quieted immediately. "Thank you all for being here," the executive began. "This week has been one of the most comprehensive leadership evaluations in company history." Heads nodded throughout the audience. The executive continued. "We reviewed financial performance, operational results, employee feedback, retention trends, leadership behavior, and organizational culture." Daniel sat straighter. The executive smiled. "Before we announce future leadership decisions, there is someone we would like to recognize." The room remained silent. Daniel exchanged a quick glance with the manager beside him. The executive turned toward the side entrance. This individual spent the last week inside this building observing every level of the organization. Confused whispers spread through the audience. Daniel frowned slightly. The executive continued. "Most of you never realized who she was." The side door opened. Several people turned instinctively. Daniel looked as well. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. Vanessa stepped into the room. She was still wearing the same janitor uniform, the same comfortable shoes, the same calm expression. Employees looked at one another in confusion. Daniel laughed softly under his breath. Surely there had been some mistake. Then the executive smiled. "Please welcome the founder and chief executive officer of Carter Holdings, Vanessa Carter." Silence. Absolute silence. It swept across the room faster than any announcement ever could. Daniel's smile disappeared instantly. Around him, employees froze in disbelief. Several stood halfway from their seats before stopping. Vanessa walked calmly toward the stage. Every step echoed across the conference center. The notebook remained in her hand. Her expression never changed. Daniel stared as though the world had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. The memory of the lobby flashed through his mind. The water, the comments, the laughter, the notebook. For the first time all week, he understood exactly why she had written in it. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The conference center seemed frozen beneath the bright lights. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on Vanessa Carter as she stepped onto the stage with the same calm presence she had carried through the building all week. The gray janitor uniform suddenly looked different. Not because it had changed, because everyone now understood who had been wearing it. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Around him, managers exchanged stunned glances. Employees who had spoken with Vanessa during the week stared in disbelief. Some smiled. Others looked emotional. A few simply shook their heads as though trying to wake from a dream. Vanessa reached the center of the stage and accepted a microphone. The small black notebook remained in her hand. She looked across the room slowly, taking in every face. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and steady. "Thank you for welcoming me into your workplace this week." A nervous ripple moved through the audience. Vanessa continued. "Most of you did not know who I was. That was intentional." She paused. "Titles change how people behave. Uniforms reveal how people behave." The room became silent again. Several employees lowered their eyes. Others nodded. Vanessa walked slowly across the stage. "Over the past 7 days, I observed remarkable dedication, kindness, professionalism, and resilience." Relief appeared on some faces. Then her expression grew more serious. "I also observed fear." The word landed heavily. Nobody spoke. Vanessa opened the notebook. "I observed employees afraid to ask questions, afraid to make mistakes, afraid to speak honestly." She looked up. No company can thrive when fear becomes part of its culture. Daniel felt every word. He sat motionless. The executive seated beside him no longer looked impressed. Vanessa turned another page. "I met talented people who considered leaving this company, not because they lacked opportunity, because they no longer felt respected." The audience remained completely still. The young employee from the break room stared toward the stage with tears gathering in her eyes. Vanessa closed the notebook. This company was built on a simple belief. Results matter. People matter more. Several employees nodded immediately. Some began applauding softly before stopping. Vanessa's gaze moved through the audience until it settled on Daniel. The room seemed to notice at once. An uncomfortable tension spread through the conference center. Daniel felt it too. For the first time in years, he had no speech prepared, no explanation ready, no performance available. Vanessa did not sound angry. That somehow made it harder. "One of my earliest observations occurred in the lobby on Monday morning," she said quietly. A few employees exchanged glances. Daniel's stomach tightened. Vanessa continued. "What happened was not important because of who I am. She paused. It was important because of who people believed I was. Silence followed. The truth required no additional explanation. Everyone understood. Vanessa looked away from Daniel and addressed the room once more. Leadership is not measured by how we treat executives. Leadership is measured by how we treat people who appear to have nothing to offer us. The words lingered in the air. Then Vanessa set the notebook on the podium. The room remained silent, because everyone sensed the most important decisions of the day had not yet been announced. The silence after Vanessa's words felt heavier than any speech Daniel had ever heard. No one checked a phone. No one whispered to a neighbor. The conference center remained completely still. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows behind the stage, casting long beams of light across rows of chairs. Vanessa stood calmly beside the podium. The notebook remained in front of her, a simple object that now seemed more powerful than any presentation displayed that morning. After several seconds, one of the corporate executives stepped forward. During this evaluation, he said, we reviewed performance metrics from every department. Financially, this division exceeded expectations. A few managers nodded. The executive continued. However, leadership is not measured by numbers alone. The room remained silent. He glanced toward Vanessa before continuing. Employee retention has declined for 4 consecutive years. Internal trust scores have fallen. Exit interviews revealed consistent concerns regarding management culture. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel stared straight ahead. The executive opened a folder. Many of those concerns pointed toward the same leadership practices. Nobody needed names yet. Everyone already understood. Vanessa slowly stepped back to the podium. She opened the notebook one final time. This week I met extraordinary people, she said. People who cared about their work. People who stayed late. People who solved problems. People who helped one another even when nobody noticed. Her eyes moved across the audience. I also met people who felt invisible. A quiet sadness settled over the room. Vanessa turned several pages. One employee told me she no longer believed her voice mattered. Another told me he was afraid to make mistakes. A third had already prepared a resignation letter. The young woman from the break room lowered her eyes. Vanessa gently closed the notebook. The tragedy is not that talented people leave organizations. The tragedy is when they leave because respect disappeared before opportunity did. Several employees nodded immediately. Some wiped at their eyes. The truth felt personal because it was. Vanessa looked toward Daniel. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Simply honesty. Mr. Brooks. The room seemed to tighten around his name. Daniel slowly stood. Every eye followed him. For the first time all week, he looked uncertain. Vanessa spoke calmly. You delivered strong results. Daniel nodded once. Yes. His voice sounded smaller than usual. Vanessa continued. Do you believe people respected you? Daniel hesitated. The question seemed simple. Yet he struggled to answer. His eyes moved across the room. Employees he supervised. Managers he worked beside. People he barely noticed. For the first time, he saw expressions he had ignored for years. Disappointment. Exhaustion. Distance. Not respect. Daniel swallowed. I thought they did. Vanessa nodded gently. That is the difference. Silence followed. No accusation. No humiliation. Just understanding. Vanessa stepped away from the podium and addressed the audience once more. Leadership positions will be announced next month after a company-wide culture review. A ripple moved through the room. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. The promotion he believed was guaranteed had disappeared. Not because of one mistake. Because of a pattern. Vanessa lifted the notebook and held it lightly in both hands. Every person in this building helped write this week's report. She smiled softly. Some with their words. Most with their actions. Outside the windows, sunlight reflected across the city skyline. Inside, something important had shifted. Not a title. Not a promotion. Something deeper. For the first time in years, people felt seen. And as Vanessa looked across the room, she knew the final chapter of the week was only beginning. The conference center remained quiet long after the formal presentation ended. Employees lingered in their seats as if nobody wanted to be the first person to leave. Something important had happened that morning. Not a promotion. Not a corporate announcement. Something far more difficult to measure. Vanessa stepped away from the podium and moved through the crowd slowly. For the first time all week, people approached her openly. The young employee from the break room thanked her. A customer service representative shook her hand. Managers who had spent years focusing only on performance metrics now found themselves discussing trust, respect, and culture. Vanessa listened more than she spoke. That had always been her way. Near the back of the room, Daniel remained standing alone beside a row of empty chairs. The confidence that had followed him through the week was gone. He looked toward the stage, then toward the employees leaving the conference center. Finally, his eyes settled on Vanessa. For a moment, he seemed uncertain whether to approach. Then he did. The room gradually emptied around them. Sunlight still streamed through the windows, painting the floor with warm golden light. Daniel stopped several feet away. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Vanessa studied him without speaking. Daniel lowered his eyes. "Not because you are the chief executive officer." He paused. "Because I should have treated you differently even if you were not." The honesty in his voice surprised even him. Vanessa nodded slowly. "That is the lesson." Daniel looked around the room. "I thought leadership meant being the strongest person in the building." Vanessa smiled gently. "Most people do at first." The silence between them felt different now. Not hostile. Reflective. Daniel glanced toward the notebook still resting on the podium. "What happens next?" Vanessa followed his gaze. "For the company?" Daniel nodded. Vanessa looked across the nearly empty conference center. Employees were talking to one another in small groups. Some were smiling. Some appeared relieved. "We rebuild trust," she said. "One decision at a time." Daniel took a slow breath. "And me?" Vanessa considered the question carefully. "That depends on what you choose to learn from today." He nodded. There was no argument. No excuse. No attempt to defend himself. For the first time all week, he simply listened. A few minutes later, Vanessa walked through the lobby where everything had begun. The marble floor gleamed beneath the afternoon light. Employees moved through the building carrying laptops and coffee cups, but something felt different. They looked at one another more often. They smiled more easily. The words engraved on the wall seemed to carry real meaning again. Respect. Integrity. Leadership. Vanessa stopped briefly in front of them. Then she reached into her pocket and removed the small black notebook. The pages were full. The observations complete. She closed it one final time and handed it to a member of the executive review team. Outside, Chicago glowed beneath the afternoon sun. Inside, people returned to work. Not because everything had been fixed, because they finally believed it could be. Vanessa turned toward the exit and walked into the light. She had not changed the company in a week. She had simply reminded people what the company was supposed to be. And sometimes that was enough.